Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Welcome to The Courage Effect. This is Suzanne Weller, and today's conversation is going to be on what I think is an incredibly important topic right now. It is empathy. I do really feel like empathy is under attack in our current world. So many people are just looking for divisive ways or their way of getting things done. And we aren't always appreciating what other people are bringing to the table. We aren't really going out of our way to understand others. I feel like this is vital for us to do in our larger world, and especially in our workplace. And my guest today is somebody who specializes in building empathetic leadership. My guest is Patricia Bravo. Patricia does not follow convention. After earning her MBA and advancing through companies acquired by Oracle and IBM, she chose learning over promotion at Starbucks, a decision that shaped her mission today. While in corporate roles, she started teaching on the side, and that led to publishing research and expanded opportunities at the University of Washington at Bothell and UCLA Extension. Now, as the founder of Bravo for You, Patricia delivers empathetic leadership programs to clients like Sony Pictures, T-Mobile, and Amazon, hoping leaders turn empathy into strategic advantage. So important. I think a lot of people talk about empathy as being something fluffy, but it really is a strategic skill. So I am so happy to introduce you to Patricia. Patricia, such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
Nice to see you, Suzanne. Thank you for having me.
So I love in your bio how you talk about choosing learning over promotion. And one of the first questions I want to ask you is about your history. So talk to us a little bit about how you arrived to where you are now.
Yeah, like a lot of people, I spent a long time in a corporate career. And one of the things that I noticed is leaders who were making a difference across types of businesses, industries, economic cycles, geographies, we're all leading with empathy. And so I had this light bulb when I left corporate life and started my own business. And I thought, I wonder if there's something there. And I really tried to mine the experiences that I had to identify what it was that I noticed. And what the leaders were doing that made a difference is they were empathizing. And what that did for them, it seemed to blend both an opportunity for them to have really healthy, functional team relationships with their teams and their team members, and also generate the business results that they desired for their organization. So that was kind of one light bulb that went off for me. The second one happened a little bit later when I realized that I was coaching and advising leaders through the lens of empathy. We weren't talking about it at that time using that vocabulary. Mm-hmm. But once I stepped out and started examining a little bit more about what it was that was going on, that's when the light bulb went off for me and I realized, there's something here. I want to explore it a little bit more.
I'm curious, when did the word empathy come up for you? Because you're saying that it was something that you really specifically noticed, but I'm wondering, do you have a way to connect those dots in your mind now?
I think I've always had an interest in empathy. I'm somebody who's really curious about others, and I always wanted to understand the reasons why people do what they do. And so I often described myself as a student of human behavior. And so I think that was really of interest to me early on, even probably before I got into the professional world. And then the nature of the work that I did required at times that I understand people in order to facilitate organizational effectiveness, or helping leaders and their teams build more effective relationships, or help teams come together in a more powerful way. And so I think it started earlier, and I don't think I attached the word empathy to it until much later, although certainly I was familiar with the concept, but not to the degree in which I've learned in the last few years.
Well, and sadly, I feel like empathy is one of those things that really is under attack in our world right now. Mm-hmm. It's one of those, we hear so many people in our larger world thinking like, they have their agenda. They want to come at it with what they want to get. And that's how they see results manifesting. And I believe that courage is a big part of showing up with empathy. So I'd love to hear from you. How does courage flow into empathy, and why does it matter now?
Yeah. I mean, I think right now, in the workplace, as in other areas, but I'll kind of focus on the workplace. In the workplace, we're experiencing this extended period of uncertainty. That's how I keep describing it. And this extension is causing many of us to look around and try and figure out, do we adapt our behavior? How do we adapt our behavior? Or leaders at work are just under constant pressure of a different type than has been the norm in the past. And so I think it's really easy to let things like empathy fall by the wayside when there's so many things um, compounding pressure for
Mm-hmm.
leaders in organizations. And so that's where courage really comes up for me, because it's really during times like this, it's really those moments when leaders can take a courageous stand for something like empathy that can make all the difference, not just to the people in the organizations, but to their businesses. And so if a leader is willing to adopt an approach that maybe is not quite in favor at the moment, they can actually differentiate themselves. And I learned this a little bit through a leader I interviewed a few years ago when I was doing some research about whether empathy is a vehicle for authentic leadership. And it was a leader based in a large Fortune 500 organization in Latin America. And he said to me that he was leading with empathy in an organization that didn't value it. He didn't use the term cutthroat, but his descriptions of the organization led me to believe that it was a really competitive organization. And so they weren't necessarily embracing empathy. And yet it was something that he very much believed in. And so he took a courageous action and decided that he was going to use his influence as a leader and lead with empathy in a way that was really different in the organization. And so that took some courage on his part. He approached it very incrementally. It wasn't something that he could just kind of jump into fully, but he approached it incrementally. And what happened is that people in the organization began to flock to his organization. He was known as somebody that was doing things differently, and somebody who took the time to understand what people's needs were. Now, he wasn't always able to support exactly what people wanted or desired, but just the fact that he was willing to take the time to invest in them to understand created a different type of bond and a relationship between him and them. And I interviewed some of the team members that he'd worked with, and people were saying things like, if he leaves the company, I'm going to leave the company, or I've followed him to every business unit within the company because I want to work with a leader like that. And so I think there are some stories out there that we can consider right now at this time, where we can invest in some courageous empathy to make a difference when so many people are wrestling with the challenges that we're experiencing, both at a macro and a micro level.
Mm. Say a little bit more about what you think empathy looks like in the workplace.
So I think a lot about I have a formal definition of empathetic leadership, and I'll share that, but maybe then I can expand a little bit about what it looks like. The formal definition I use is that it's about accurately identifying cues and clues to activate understanding. And what that looks like is really unpacking and understanding the layers of who someone is about, what they value, what sorts of things light them up, what motivates them, what do they find challenging, what really matters to them. And I think one of the challenges that leaders are always moving so quickly at the pace of business that's necessary these days. And one of the challenges I find is that leaders sometimes wrestle with the concept of understanding as something that is going to require them to behave in a way that perhaps they don't want to, or they think might slow them down in the business. And so I hear a lot from leaders of, oh, I don't know, how long is this going to take? It sounds like it's going to be exhausting. And really, empathy can happen in just 10 minutes. It's really about taking some time to invest in learning a little bit more about someone else. So what this can look like is sitting down and listening to, something that someone had that is something that's really positive that happened in their work world, maybe in their personal life if they choose to share it, a challenge they're experiencing with another leader in the organization or a stakeholder or a project that went sideways, and really trying to understand that from their perspective. The challenge is that that's not so easy. So you've probably heard the adage empathy is about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us have heard that. And what I find challenging about that description is that it's really hard to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. We don't necessarily have the wiring that somebody else might have, or their experiences, or the numerous pieces of history that they have, the types of interactions that they've had with other people. Sure, there might be intersections and there might be places where we can relate, but I think it's really difficult to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. So to the extent that we can tune in, and listening is just one way to do that. And I know we've all heard about listening thousands of times, but it's just one component to do that. But the trick is to do it below the surface level. So moving from a place of shallow to more depth.
And doing that intentionally and with a good idea of what you want to bring authentically, as opposed to doing it to just check a box and then moving on.
Exactly. People can see right through that. When I started doing this work, several people asked me about weaponized empathy, and that to me is just like anything else that's disingenuous. No one wants to interact with people that are operating in a just disingenuous way, and they can see through that. And so that comes up in lots of different ways in organization, and I think disingenuous empathy is simply one of those. And so it can be weaponized just like any other behavior.
Mm. Do you also think that team building gets a little bit confused with empathy?
Mm. Sometimes um, I think sometimes the difference between team building and team development is an area to maybe pull apart or tease apart. And the way I look at it is that team development is kind of broad and macro, and it's really about helping a team get to higher performance.
Hmm.
And team building is a component of team development. And the team building component, a lot of times, is where trust building happens. And I think that's the intersection with empathy. And so sometimes I think people use different labels because they're not thinking about this all day long like I enjoy. And I think they use different terminology. And so I think often people talk about team building as an idea for developing more trust on a team. And I think if you're thinking about that, I think empathy does the same thing. I think empathy also creates more trust on a team, because the more that you understand people and the more that you understand one another, you develop stronger relationship bonds and allow for more idiosyncrasy. Have you ever heard the term idiosyncrasy credits?
No, say more.
I first heard about it from Adam Grant, and he talks about how once we get to know people, we all have kind of these quirks, those idiosyncrasies that we all have, and we're willing to cut people some slack and give more room or space for them. That's the credits, the idiosyncrasy credits, if we know more about who they are and we've developed trusting bonds. And I think when we invest in understanding others and we know what they're about and their motivations and how they operate, and we've learned enough about them that we can maybe even sometimes predict some of their behavior and how they might respond to things, we're more willing to accept their quirks and those behaviors that are maybe outside what we typically see.
I love that. Idiosyncrasy credits. Okay, I'm going to definitely research more of that. Thank you, Adam Grant. I want to go back for a second. The reason why I asked you about the team building question is because I've worked with a number of leaders that they think that, that showing empathy is like, oh, I'm just going to take my team out for happy hour, or I'm going to do something that they consider team building, where sometimes getting to know somebody personally, to me, can be a great thing, but it doesn't necessarily build exactly what you said, trust in this process. And I feel that sometimes people can confuse those things. The idea that like, well, I asked them about their family and I asked them about what they like to do, but it doesn't necessarily
Yes.
build them that equity at work.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's where I really start to think about the layers of understanding that you unpack with empathy. And so there's a surface layer of, sure, this person likes to play baseball on the weekend. But what does that mean for them? Is that something that they've done, their whole life? Is it something they're doing because somebody, invited them to do it? Is it something they're passionate about? And those kinds of questions are the same ones that I might ask somebody in the workplace. Why are they working in this field? Is this just a job for them? Or is this, a path to something greater? Or is this their passion? That information, that insight that you get also helps us in the workplace, especially for leaders in making more effective decisions. And so I think that's another area that links really effectively for leaders in marrying both the human side and the business side. The human side is, maybe trust that we're talking about here, but then there's a business side that I think you can also activate with empathy. And so higher quality decision making is one of those areas.
Definitely. And innovation and collaboration and all these other things, I think, that go
Exactly.
along with that.
Yes.
So what does it really take to empathize?
The first thing is a willingness. So to your point earlier, it's not about checking a box. It's really about investing in another person. And again, I want to reiterate that it just takes 10 minutes, because sometimes when I say investing, people start to think, oh my gosh, is this, 6 months of me doing something? 10-minute increments, you can just unpack a little bit more, a little bit more. And by the way, if anyone's thinking about where am I going to find another 10 minutes, because I recognize that in today's world, even 10 minutes is a lot for some people. I've been advising people to use the approach of strategic subtraction, which is to identify something in your calendar that's maybe a nice to have, not a must have, and we all have them, even me, and to really find 10 minutes that you can use as a substitute for something else that's maybe not as high priority right now, and invest in empathy. So part of it is investing time, some intentionality around it, like you said, and exploring understanding another person through multiple lenses. So I mentioned listening is one of them. Another one is really around engaging your emotions, because I think human connection really happens when you engage at the emotional level. I had a leader that I worked with once that operated as many leaders do. They're rewarded for turning around the business and identifying places where the company can absorb a budget cut, or taking a business into new markets. And they're spending a lot of time kind of cognitively, very intellectually. That's what we need a lot from leaders. And so then when you say to them, hold on, we need you to empathize, and let's start with engaging your emotions, they're like, whew, it feels like whiplash to them. And so I had a leader once that really valued this approach, but it wasn't natural for him. And so he chose to pinch himself on his way to a conference room when he was getting ready to go have a meeting with somebody, because it was his reminder of, oh, let me become more present in myself and in my body so I can engage emotionally in this conversation, as well as the intellectual side, which came very naturally for him.
It's almost like the rubber band on the wrist that
Yes,
people use.
exactly. Yep, it was just his cue to help remind him. So I think some of those things can help you activate empathy a little bit more effectively.
I love the idea of something that is so small but can really make you present in a very meaningful way. Patricia, I'd love to hear from you about myth busting. Why does empathy really matter?
Yeah. Oh, this gets me excited, because one of my favorite things in working with leaders is when I can see their shoulders come down. And so, like we were talking about, leaders are busy, they're under pressure, they've got a lot going on. And so sometimes the topic of empathy is not the first priority in their minds. And so when I come and talk to them, one of the things that I recognize is that they need to hear quickly some of the things that are actually myths about empathy. And one that comes up frequently is a leader belief that if they invest in empathy, they're going to feel some sort of obligation to respond in a way that's favorable to a request that another is making, that a team is making, or a team member is making, or feel like they need to capitulate because they've gained some understanding about somebody else's point of view. And so one of the things that I like to refer to often is that empathy is about understanding, but understanding does not equal agreement. And so while a team member maybe doesn't want to be put on a particular project because they know it's going to come with a tricky stakeholder who's maybe not the most pleasant to work with, but a leader doesn't have anybody else to put on that project, or maybe it's a developmental opportunity for this team member. So the leader can understand that that team member might have some reluctance to be placed on this project. But what that does is it gives the leader information to inform their response and maybe lower the barriers a little bit of resistance and that team member might have or apprehension, and then approach the response in a way that the team member can more readily accept it, or recognize that that team member might need to accept it over a period of time, and then maybe it's going to take 2 or 3 conversations. And so empathy is about understanding, but understanding does not equal agreement is one that I notice kind of the leader's shoulders relax a little bit once they realize, this is really about me gaining more insight. And I think that also leads to more effective decision making, because leaders are looking at, dashboards and KPIs and OKRs and whatever that, is necessary in their organizations. And then they have another data point that's the human side that can also inform that equation so they can make a more well-rounded decision. I think the other myth that maybe is not as well observed, that and I have to raise my hand here because we all fall into this trap, is particularly when people are moving quickly, we tend to jump to judgment. And so I think empathy really competes with judgment. And I'd like to say that it never happens to me, but I fall into that trap too. But if you are investing in empathizing and it's at the forefront of your mind, and you're going to be investing, in 10-minute increments with your team or your team members, it encourages thought about understanding the other person. It puts you in the space of the other person rather in our own space. And so I'm sure, we've all fallen into the trap of judgment and then learned the hard way that maybe we weren't accurate. And so I think that's kind of a myth that is one to bust as well, but one that doesn't necessarily come up so overtly.
I love that you brought both of those up. First and foremost, that understanding isn't necessarily agreement, because I do believe that that for a lot of people, like, well, we have to agree. That's the goal. And that to me is a matter of there's always going to be some sort of compromise that happens.
Yeah.
And how do one of my favorite questions is, why is this so important to you?
Yeah.
Like this is where I am. Yeah. Talk to me about why this is, where you are is important to you. Mm-hmm. Because that for me is always an empathy getter. And it does exactly what you brought up as the second myth. It takes me out of the judgment part of my brain, where I'm like, okay, this is the result that I want and what I need to get. It's like, well, maybe this isn't the best result. So open up and allow that to come in.
Right. Yeah. You can learn more of the facts, or something that somebody's wrestling with, or maybe they have an emotional reason that they may not even recognize that's behind it, and it allows you to work through it a little bit more effectively.
I find this as a coach, when I ask a similar question to that in coaching with people, like, well, why is this so important to you? It's different when we have to vocalize that to somebody, because Sure. Sometimes we get so dug in that we're like, well, why am I so passionate about this? I think that talking about that can be quite a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just bringing it literally out loud into the world.
Yeah. Well, and as you talked about, we all have goals, we have OKRs, we're all biased for action, or not all of us, but so many of us have that bias for action, and we want those results. We're so focused on results. Talk to us a little bit about the impact and the value of empathy, because that is one of the things that, as you said, people think it's this big investment, it's going to slow things down, and they don't necessarily have time for it. Yeah. Why should leaders invest in empathy?
Yes. Oh, I love you just brought up that leaders think it's going to slow things down. And I think that is something a lot of people jump to. And one area where I like to encourage that leaders maybe consider a reframe is that it's not about slowing down business. It's actually about creating relationship shortcuts, which saves time. And I have yet to meet a leader that doesn't want to save time. I'm looking for them. If you see them, let me know, because I think they're a unicorn. But I think relationship shortcuts save time. And so by empathizing, by understanding others, you do get a little bit not a crystal ball, but a little bit of a predictive quality where you start to understand, oh, if I go talk to this team member about speaking on a stage, I know they're going to be reluctant because they don't like to speak up a lot in meetings. They're a little, nervous when they're asked to do presentations. And so you can use that information and that insight to prepare and to also continue to build a relationship with them in a way that over time, you might approach that person and say, I know speaking engagements are not your favorite. I've got one coming up for you. Will you be, more open to considering it, knowing that you've had success these last 2 times? And so all of a sudden it goes from maybe 2 or 3 different discussions to one because you've built that relationship shortcut. So you do save some time. And so that's one area that I think really matters where you get the impact. On the flip side, and so I'd say that's kind of micro that builds over time. At the macro level, we're starting to see the research is starting to really quantify in hard dollars the impact that organizationally empathy can have, specifically empathy in leadership. And we've seen a study recently that a 10% increase in empathetic leadership translates to a $1,000 per employee per year productivity boost. And so that always catches the attention of leaders that are thinking in dollars and cents. Now, I will add a little caveat, which is I think it's also important to not get caught up solely in the dollars and cents. I understand that it's important to run business, but I do find that sometimes when we're talking about empathy, leaders are really eager to intellectualize and spend a lot of time talking about the costs and the dollars, which are important. And it also takes us a little bit further away from engaging on the other end of the continuum, which is really being present to make a human connection with someone.
Yes. Well, and we shouldn't have to sacrifice one for the other.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think about, as you were talking about before with, the loyalty that goes along with it, the leader that you worked with where he was bringing this in where it wasn't necessarily a culture that was embracing empathy and people were flocking to him. And we've always heard, or, we've heard commonly, people don't necessarily leave companies, they leave bosses.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I think that's one advantage. And it's a leadership advantage that leaders can gain from leading with empathy is that they are going to receive some loyalty from team members. On the flip side, we know if I could use the term turbulent times, which might be how we might be describing some of the experiences that are happening right now, there's also a lot of movement, a lot of transition in organizations. And so, loyalty for some organizations means different things. So I think another aspect or an advantage of empathy is when people feel really understood and they have strong relationship bonds with their leaders, they're often willing to give discretionary effort. And that is effort that goes above and beyond what's expected. It's voluntary. And I think that is another area that's a real benefit for leaders. So they save time, they make more effective decisions, and then they're getting some additional effort, productivity, work essentially from team members that are volunteering it because of the strength of the relationship that they feel with the leader.
And it goes so much further than that beyond just that role, right? It's also, there are certain people that I would drop anything to work with them because I know how good they are.
Yeah.
And that's not just about them being good at what they do, but they're amazing to work with.
Yes. Yeah. Good at what they do and who they are and how they interact.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to underestimate that, to be so obsessed with those results in time where it's like, well, what was so special about working with this person? What was the thing that made it magic?
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between results and magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
There you go. And I would love to round out our conversation. Empathy is complex. So talk to me about, obviously this is what you do. I'd love for you to speak a little bit about the complexity of empathy.
Yeah, I think over the last few years, as empathy has entered the conversation much more regularly, I think it's really easy to use it as a label that represents a lot of different things. One of them being understanding, developing trust, all these things that we've talked about. But also, I think it is getting a misnomer as a substitute for listening or caring or becoming a more present leader or an effective leader, and all those things are certainly relevant. But like empathy at its core is really about engaging at a deeper level with individuals. And that's complex because we're complex human beings. So it's not as easy as it might appear on the surface to really understand another person. And of course, we all have people close to us that we probably understand much better than others. But in the workplace, it takes a little bit of effort to make that investment and gain the degree of understanding that's really going to translate into those human and business results. And so I think it's really important to recognize that it's not just about one-time empathy, it's about empathy over time.
So important. Empathy over time, not just one time. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a curveball question.
All right.
What about leaders that could potentially be over-empathizing?
Ooh, yes. I hear that question a lot. What about over-empathizing? Or some people will say to me in so many words, I really value empathy, and yet I think I over-index on empathy. What that is often about is boundaries. Not always, but often when I unpack what's going on, what I hear from leaders is that they have a above average or a natural affinity towards empathy and understanding. And as a result, they have an overwhelming desire to assist in some way. And so what I often find, again, not always, is that it's not about empathizing too much, because I don't think you can understand people too much. I think that's kind of infinite. But I do think it's possible to over-respond. And so I think when people say I empathize too much, what they're actually talking about is over-responding and feeling the need, perhaps because they want to assist. Often these are from people that are wired for helping. They really want to help others. You recognize that, or you resemble that?
Indeed. I fall into that camp naturally, and I have to fight that instinct.
Yes, and it's a wonderful quality, and yet it also requires that you monitor your boundaries and determine where are those times where you're falling into a trap and you're over-indexing on responding as opposed to over-empathizing.
Thank you for that. I love the differentiation between the response and the reaction, right? Like, I mean, what you're feeling versus how it's actually manifesting in your behavior.
Yes.
All right. So as we're wrapping up our conversation, I'd love for you to, well, first of all, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed this. I'd love to hear a little bit about the course that you have on networking and how empathy plays into that. So talk to us a little bit about your course and your larger work.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise you. I have a course called Empathy Means Business, and which is, what people would expect to see from me. But this course came about, and it's called Synced, Networking from Gross to Great. It came about because in today's climate, people are networking so much more for a variety of reasons. I think the extended uncertainty is causing people to want to explore more with each other, what might be happening in their landscape, what does the future look like? People are certainly looking for job opportunities. And so I'm hearing a lot about networking, but what I also hear is a dislike perhaps of the transactional aspect of networking. People who are not comfortable with networking, perhaps because they view it as needing to ask somebody for something. So there's a lot of reasons why people are maybe less interested in networking, even though cognitively they might know it's important for their career. And so it struck me that one of the things I've seen and experienced myself in networking that is most valuable is the value of empathy in networking in a relationship between two people. Because at the end of the day, a valuable networking partnership or relationship is where both people are benefiting. And so we developed this course to help people get out of a place of transaction and get into a place of evaluating the strength of the relationships at different levels of people in their network. And so the course is designed to help people evaluate the strength of their network, not through the lens of quantity or industry or number of contacts, but actually the strength of the relationship. And we suggest a lot of different ways in which the relationship can be strengthened through the lens of empathy, because if you understand others and what they want or need, then you can bring support to them, and ultimately they may offer some support to you as well. And so the idea is that both people can benefit from this relationship.
So important. And because relationships are about choice, what are the ones that what level do we decide to invest in it? But
Yeah.
I really appreciate you talking about it being symbiotic, because so much of the time it's not just, give and take, but it's the idea of how do you make it mutually beneficial? And that doesn't mean that it's going to be the exact same thing for each person.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Yes,
Fantastic.
we're excited. We've gotten some great feedback, so we're excited to see what we can learn also from how people engage with each other.
Nice. I really appreciate bringing the empathy lens to that, because we don't necessarily think about it in that way. I think and especially when you use the word networking, because a lot of people think about that as being very self-fulfilling. So it's like, okay, how do I do this in a way where it's not just about me and I'm able to make it a great experience for the people that I'm also interacting with, which will then also benefit me. But
Exactly.
it's not just about you.
Exactly. And also, I have found for people that are perhaps earlier in their career and are talking to people with more experience, they feel they don't have anything to bring to the conversation, which I find 99.9% of the time is not true. They just may not know the types of things that somebody else might find valuable. And so if you empathize and get to know that person, there may be a light bulb that goes off, for like, oh, I have something actually I can contribute to this person that I hadn't thought would be of value to them.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to do a few takeaways from what I heard from our conversation about empathy. Empathy doesn't have to be a massive investment. It's something that you can do in a shorter or relatively shorter period of time than maybe you expect. Empathy is about understanding, but understanding isn't necessarily about agreement, ensuring that we differentiate and have an idea of what our intentions are and what we want to get out of it. And I love the idea of empathy is about creating relationship shortcuts that save time. So it really is about building equity in a relationship with somebody that you know that you can rely upon later, and to build that connective tissue other than it just being transactional in nature.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Any final thoughts as we wrap up, Patricia?
This has been great, Suzanne. Thank you for making time for this. I'm excited to continue to see what kind of a ripple effect people can have with empathy, because empathy is really within everybody's reach.
I couldn't agree more. And it takes courage to do it and to actually make the investment to do it. So thank you so much for being here, Patricia. A pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care. Stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. If you're looking for a leadership coach, maybe a speaker or a consultant, to help you or your team be more courageous and adaptable, we would love to have a conversation. More information is available via the links in our show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. You taking a few minutes to rate or review your favorite episodes or share them with people in your universe makes a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more information about the show, me, our amazing guests, or you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, please contact us via our website at thecourageeffect.com. It takes a village to bring this show to you. I want to thank Alex Nandyforth for her production and administrative superpowers, Dave Nelson for composing our theme music, and I am your host and sometimes producer, Suzanne Weller. Thank you again for listening.